Stephen Meyer from the University of Colorado and Martin Seligman from the University of Pennsylvania had collaborated for an experiment that most of us would call cruel for today's time. The topic of their experiment was learned helplessness in animals, an inescapable shock, as they called it. The experiment was conducted by dividing the dogs into 3 groups. In group number 1 were the dogs placed in a harness and were struck with electric shocks. However, they had a lever they could press to stop the shocks. In group 2 were the dogs that were placed in a harness and were given electric shocks. However, they did not have any control over the shocks. The shocks were given at random intervals and could not be stopped by any action they took. Group number 2 was just a control group and did not receive any shocks. After this initial phase, all 3 groups of dogs were placed in a shuttle box. This shuttle box was divided into 2 sections by a lower barrier that the dogs could easily jump over. The floor in one side of the box could deliver a mild electric shock, while the other side was safe, as you can see in the picture. Now here's the critical observations they made. Dogs from the first group who had learned that they could stop the shocks in the first phase quickly learned to jump to the safe side to avoid the shocks. Dogs from the third group, the control group, also quickly learned to jump over the barrier to safe side to avoid the shocks. Dogs from the second group, who had experienced the inescapable shocks in the first phase, often did not even try to escape the shocks. They simply lay down passively, enduring the shocks without attempt to even avoid them. This behavior was interpreted as the learned helplessness. The dogs from the second group had learned through the first phase of the experiment that they had no control over the shocks. Consequently, even when an opportunity to escape was presented in the shuttle box, they didn't even try. They had learned that nothing they did mattered, so they didn't even attempt to change their circumstances. So what do we learn about human behavior from this experiment? The mere opportunity or the presence of opportunity does not make traumatized people choose to run for their freedom. Many traumatized people, like Seligman and Meyer's dog, choose to simply give up. Oftentimes, we find ourselves asking questions like, well, why didn't she just run away? Or why didn't she just fight back? Well, here's why. Findings have suggested that the levels of cortisol, which is a stress hormone, are low in people suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder. This hormone cortisol spikes in the times of stress, but sends an all-clear signal to the brain once the issue of stress is dissolved. But in the case of a person with PTSD, these cortisol hormones do not return to the baseline. Our stress hormones are meant to have a super fast response to stress, but then also come back to the equilibrium condition once the issue is dissolved. But in patients of PTSD, the flight-fight signals continue even after the danger is over, as it was in the case of dogs from group number 2. So is there nothing that can be done to help these dogs or people? Meyer and Seligman later found that the only way to teach the traumatized dogs to get out when the doors open was to repeatedly drag them out of their cages, to teach them the physical experience of how they could get away too. The same could be done in case of patients too. Maybe they could be taught that they could run away for their freedom as well, that the situation that they could not do anything to protect themselves is now over. Maybe they could be taught to take control again. With this, I will take my leave for this video. I'll see you again with another mind-squirming video. But till then, remember to like, share, and most importantly, be empathetic.